February 10th, 2026. Elkins Park, Pennsylvania. 920 Spring Avenue. The day is cold in a way that seeps into bone. Not sharp, not dramatic, just persistent. A damp winter wind slides through leafless branches and rattles ironwork that has not been touched by human hands in years. The sky hangs low and heavy, the color of dull pewter, as if the sun itself has decided not to fight. It is late afternoon, one of those hours when daylight feels tired, like it already knows it will lose. Imagine standing here. You're outside a lock gate. Beyond it, a long driveway stretches forward, then disappears, swallowed by shadow, vines, and neglect. The land slopes gently, and through the bare trees you can just make out the shape of something enormous. Indiana limestone. Pale, massive, unapologetic. From a distance, the mansion almost fools you. It still looks intact, still dignified, still powerful. But as you move closer, the illusion breaks. Windows are no longer windows. They are cavities, dark, hollow, empty. Stone is streaked with stains left by decades of rain and snow. Places where glass once held back the seasons are now open wounds. Somewhere inside, a loose shutter taps against its frame, again and again, like a tired clock that refuses to stop counting time. The air smells faintly of wet leaves and something else. Old plaster, old dust, old decisions. This is Lynnewood Hall, a 110-room neoclassical revival palace built at the peak of America's Gilded Age. So grand that historians once called it the last of the American Versailles. A private residence so large it blurred the line between home and monument. Construction began in 1897. It was completed in 1899. The documented cost, $8 million, a number so large for its time that it almost defies meaning. In modern terms, that's roughly $300 million poured into limestone, marble, copper, and ambition. The mansion stretches 268 feet long, 215 feet deep, covering nearly 110,000 square feet. It was designed by architect Horace Trumbauer for one man, Peter A.B. Widener. This was not just a house. It was a declaration that America, new industrial, restless, could rival Europe's centuries-old aristocracy, that wealth, if concentrated enough, could manufacture permanence, that money could outlast mortality. And yet, standing here now, the irony is almost painful, because the money that raised these walls could buy limestone, it could buy art, it could buy servants, silence, power, but it could not buy time, and it could not buy safe passage across the Atlantic. Long before this mansion was ever labeled abandoned, it was already marked by absence. April 15th, 1912. The North Atlantic Ocean. The night is black. The water is unimaginably cold. And the ship is sinking. The RMS Titanic. On that night, two men who were meant to inherit this palace, meant to expand it, live inside it, and carry its legacy forward, disappeared into the sea. George Dunton Widener, born 1861. Harry Elkins Widener, born 1885. Father and son. When people ask why one of America's richest families would ever abandon a palace like Lynnewood Hall, the answer is uncomfortable because it refuses to be simple. They did not abandon it all at once. There was no dramatic closing of gates. No single moment where someone turned off the lights and walked away forever. Instead, the house was slowly emptied. By grief, by economics, by a century that stopped forgiving excess, and by something harder to name. Because sometimes a palace is not abandoned by people. Sometimes history abandons it. But this story does not begin with broken windows and winter wind. It begins in Philadelphia, with a boy who had no marble beneath his feet. Peter A.B. Widener was born on November 13th, 1834, in Philadelphia. He did not inherit a title. He did not inherit an estate. He inherited work. You can almost smell the early years of his life. The sharp, metallic scent of meat, sawdust on a shop floor, cold air slipping under a door that never quite sealed. Widener started in the meat business. Not glamorous, not refined, but reliable. He built a chain of butcher shops. He learned supply-demand margins. And when the American Civil War erupted, Widener made a decision that would change everything. He secured a contract supplying mutton to Union troops near Philadelphia. War for some is destruction. For others, it is opportunity. With the profits, Widener did not rest. He invested, specifically, in streetcar lines, the infrastructure of a growing city. Rails turned neighborhoods into markets. Transportation turned time into money. This is where the transformation happens. Not just wealth accumulating, but identity reshaping itself. By the late 19th century, America was manufacturing a new kind of aristocracy. Not one built on ancient bloodlines, but on steel, tobacco, transportation, and corporate power. Widener became entangled with the largest structures of the age. Philadelphia Traction Company, connections to U.S. Steel, American Tobacco, International Mercantile Marine Company, the machinery of modern capitalism. And with that power came a hunger that is both understandable and dangerous, the desire to be remembered. Some men build churches, some build universities. Widener built a house so large it could hold his family, and an art collection so vast it could imitate Europe itself. Lynnewood Hall was not designed to be merely lived in. It was designed to impress. Indiana limestone outside, marble and imported stone inside, grand halls, galleries meant to cradle masterpieces. The house even had its own electrical power plant, wine cellars, a ballroom capable of holding 1,000 guests, an indoor swimming pool. At its height, around 100 staff members worked here daily, an invisible workforce sustaining visible luxury. The opening night came on December 19, 1899. 400 guests arrived. Music by the New York Symphony filled the halls. The soprano Johanna Gotsky sang. Silk dresses brushed marble. Cigars burned low. Footsteps echoed through halls so new they still reflected candlelight. The house opened like a theater. Wealth itself was a performance. And no one in that moment could have imagined how quickly the future would narrow, because history was already moving toward the sea. April 1912. Europe is in bloom. Spring light falls on boulevards and hotel balconies. Cafes spill into the streets. For wealthy American families, this is not travel. It is ritual. Art purchases. Social calls. A reminder that money can cross oceans faster than memory. George Dutton Widener and his son, Harry Elkins Widener, move through this world comfortably. George is 50 years old, a businessman shaped by his father's rise, confident, composed, expected to carry the Widener empire forward. Harry is 26, young, brilliant, and intensely cultured, a Harvard graduate, a bibliophile, a man more interested in rare books and Renaissance art than in factories and balance sheets. Harry is not just an heir. He is a curator of taste. In Europe, he acquires treasures, illuminated manuscripts, early printed books, objects meant to last centuries, items chosen carefully, almost obsessively. He understands fragility. He understands preservation. What he does not understand yet is how thin the line is between permanence and disappearance. Their return passage is booked on a new ship, a ship spoken of in superlatives. The RMS Titanic, the largest moving object ever built by human hands. A floating city. A declaration in steel that technology had finally mastered nature. Unsinkable. George, his wife Eleanor Widener, and Harry board the ship. Eleanor's maid travels with them. The accommodations are first class. Of course, lavish cabins, grand staircases, dining rooms glowing with light and confidence. On board, life unfolds as expected. Meals arrive on time. Music plays. Conversations drift between business, art, and plans waiting back home. The Atlantic is calm. The ship cuts through the water with effortless authority. Harry spends time reading. George discusses the future. Lynnewood Hall waits across the ocean. Rooms prepared, walls steady. Art ready to be installed. A dynasty feels intact. Then, on the night of April 14th, the temperature drops. Late evening. The sea is unusually still. So calm it looks like black glass. The absence of waves hides danger. Icebergs are harder to spot when the water does not break against them. At 11:40 p.m., the Titanic strikes ice. It is not a dramatic collision. No explosion. No immediate chaos. Just a jolt. enough to make people look up from their conversations. But below the waterline, the damage is precise and fatal. Steel plates buckle, compartments flood. The ship, designed to survive multiple breaches, has been cut in too many places. The future begins to leak out. At first, passengers are reassured. The ship is unsinkable, they are told. Lifeboats are a precaution. But then the truth spreads, not loudly, not all at once. Quiet instructions. Crew members moving faster than before. A tension that settles into the air like fog. George and Eleanor understand what is happening. They make their way to the deck. Cold air bites through coats. The stars above are painfully clear. Lifeboats are being uncovered. Women and children are being guided forward. This is where the story narrows. This is where wealth stops mattering. George places Eleanor into a lifeboat. He makes sure her maid goes with her. There's no recorded argument. No dramatic speech preserved in history. Just a decision. One of the oldest decisions in human storytelling. Who goes? Who stays? Harry remains with his father. Some accounts suggest Eleanor hesitated. Others say she obeyed immediately. Either way, the lifeboat lowers away from the ship. Distance opens. A few feet, then yards, then a silence broken only by water and the groaning of steel. George and Harry are left behind. The Titanic tilts. The angle increases slowly, horribly. The deck becomes difficult to stand on. The cold is now brutal. Around them, the illusion of safety collapses completely. People realize there are not enough lifeboats. They realize time is running out. They realize that money cannot purchase space in the dark water. Harry, who loved books, preservation, continuity, faces something that cannot be archived. The end. At 2:20 a.m., the Titanic disappears beneath the surface of the Atlantic. More than 1,500 people die. George Widener does not survive. Harry Widener does not survive. Their bodies are never recovered. Back in Pennsylvania, Lynnewood Hall stands unchanged. Stone does not react to tragedy. Marble does not crack from grief. But absence arrives faster than any messenger. News travels across the ocean. Headlines print names. Telegrams arrive with brutal efficiency. Eleanor Widener survives. But survival is not the same as return. When she comes home, the house is different. Rooms built for family gatherings now contain echoes. Chairs meant for conversation sit unused. Plans for expansion dissolve overnight. The future Lynnewood Hall was designed for is gone. Peter A.B. Widener received the news as an old man whose empire suddenly feels irrelevant. His son and grandson, his continuity, are gone. This is not just personal loss. It is architectural loss. Because Lynnewood Hall was not built for Peter alone. It was built for generations, for inheritance, for growth. Now, it has been amputated at the source. The mansion continues to operate. Staff still report for duty. Meals are still served. The estate remains vast. But something essential has failed. The house still stands. Yet its purpose has collapsed inward. Peter Widener's health declines. Grief compounds age. By the time he dies in 1915, here at Lynnewood Hall, the palace already feels like a monument rather than a home. He leaves behind wealth. He leaves behind property. He leaves behind art. But dynasties require people more than walls. Joseph E. Widener, the surviving son, inherits the estate. He inherits responsibility, not ambition. He understands something his father never had to consider. A palace without heirs is a liability. The art collection, once the soul of the house, begins its slow migration outward. What was meant to glorify a family instead becomes something else, a gift to the nation. In 1942, more than 2,000 works of art are donated to the National Gallery of Art in Washington, D.C. Masterpieces by Raphael, Rembrandt, Vermeer, Gainsborough, removed from private halls and placed into public memory. Lynnewood Hall loses its heart, and what remains is structure, expensive, massive, silent. The Titanic did not just sink a ship. It sank a future that had already been built in stone. And from that night forward, Lynnewood Hall was no longer a palace racing toward tomorrow. It was a house learning how to live with yesterday. After tragedy, life does not stop. That is one of its cruelties. Lynnewood Hall does not close its doors in mourning. The gates remain open. Staff continue their routines. Fires are lit. Meals are prepared. The machinery of wealth keeps moving, even when the reason for movement has disappeared. But something subtle has changed. The house no longer looks forward. It looks inward. Joseph E. Widener inherits Lynnewood Hall, not as a dream fulfilled, but as a responsibility inherited. He is not driven by the same hunger that built the palace. He does not need to prove that American money can rival European nobility. That argument has already been made and paid for. Instead, Joseph understands something quieter and more practical. A palace is not a symbol. It is a system, and systems demand constant feeding. Heating alone consumes fortunes. Staff wages pile up. Repairs never end. Stone cracks. Pipes age. Roofs fail in places no guest ever sees. The house does not decay dramatically. It decays bureaucratically through invoices and maintenance logs. Meanwhile, the world outside is changing. The First World War reshapes economies and attitudes. Excess becomes harder to justify. The Gilded Age gives way to something leaner, more suspicious a spectacle. And inside Lynnewood Hall, the most valuable objects begin to feel out of place. The art. The Widener collection is legendary even by modern standards. Paintings, sculptures, tapestries, rare books, objects collected not casually, but deliberately. This was not decoration. This was cultural acquisition. The galleries inside the mansion once functioned like a private museum. Guests moved through curated spaces, encountering Raphael, Rembrandt, Vermeer, not in public institutions, but in a family home. But art is restless when locked away. And Joseph Widener makes a decision that permanently alters the meaning of Lynnewood Hall. In 1942, more than 2,000 works from the Widener collection are donated to the National Gallery of Art in Washington, D.C. This is not liquidation. This is transformation. What was once private magnificence becomes public inheritance. The cultural center of gravity shifts from a single estate in Pennsylvania to a national institution. The soul of the palace leaves the building. Rooms designed to cradle masterpieces are suddenly empty. Walls that once glowed with oil and gold now hold only their own shadows. Lynnewood Hall becomes something else. Not a museum. Not quite a home. A shell of intention. Joseph Widener dies in 1943. With his death, the era of Lynnewood as a family seat effectively ends. The estate begins to fragment. Not physically at first, but administratively. Portions of land are sold. Boundaries shrink. The original 300 acres are reduced, piece by piece, as modern development presses closer. The palace remains, but it is now unmoored from dynasty. In 1952, Lynnewood Hall is sold. The buyer is not another tycoon, not a collector, not a dreamer. It is the Faith Theological Seminary. The purchase price, $192,000, a fraction of the mansion's original cost, even accounting for inflation. What once represented untouchable wealth is now affordable through institutional budgeting. The transition is quiet. Students arrive carrying books instead of invitations. Hallways once echoing with orchestral music now carry footsteps and whisper debates about theology and scripture. Ballrooms become classrooms. Dining halls become cafeterias. Guest suites become dormitories. The building adapts, but not gracefully, because Lynnewood Hall was never designed for efficiency. It was designed for awe. Heating such a structure is punishingly expensive. Maintenance becomes triage. Only what is necessary is preserved. Decorative elements are ignored if they serve no function. The seminary does its best, but the math is unforgiving. Over time, financial pressure mounts. And this is where the palace begins to die. Not violently, not all at once, but in pieces. Carved woodwork is removed. Architectural elements are sold. Anything severable becomes currency. This is how American palaces end. Not in fire, but in inventory. A mantle here, paneling there. Fragments of craftsmanship scattered into private collections, antique shops, warehouses. The mansion remains standing, but it is slowly hollowed out. By the late 1990s, the seminary can no longer sustain the property. Lynnewood Hall is abandoned. No ceremony marks the moment. No final closing. People simply stop coming. Lights go off and do not come back on. Nature, patient and methodical, begins its work. Water finds weaknesses. Freeze-thaw cycles widen cracks. Leaves pile up where floors once gleamed. Urban explorers eventually arrive, drawn by rumors and photographs. They describe an eerie beauty. Pitch-black corridors. Tunnels beneath the house. Sunlight slicing through broken ceilings. A ruined swimming pool. Dust-covered rooms. Kitchenware left behind, as if someone stepped out for a moment and never returned. Time appears frozen, not preserved but paused mid-collapse. For years, the mansion sits like this. Too large to ignore. Too expensive to rescue. Too haunted to repurpose easily. Lynnewood Hall becomes a symbol, not of wealth, but the cost of it. A reminder that grandeur does not age well when the world around it changes. And yet, the story refuses to end in decay. In 2023, Lynnewood Hall is purchased for $9 million by the Lynnewood Hall Preservation Foundation. The intention is restoration, not resurrection. No one is pretending this will ever be a private palace again. But preservation, stabilization, memory given structure. In August 2025, the mansion is listed on the National Register of Historic Places. The house, once built to glorify one family, is now protected for everyone. This is the final transformation, from private dream to institutional space, to ruin to historical artifact. Lynnewood Hall does not return to life as it once was. It returns as a lesson that wealth can build monuments, but cannot guarantee relevance. That houses meant to outlast time are often the first to be abandoned by it. And standing here now, you can feel it. This palace was never destroyed. It was outlived. Abandonment is not loud. That is a mistake people make when they imagine it. There is no explosion, no dramatic collapse, no single night when everything ends. Abandonment arrives quietly. At Lynnewood Hall, it begins with absence. No footsteps in the corridors. No voices drifting through stairwells. No light behind the windows at dusk. The building does not know it has been abandoned. It only knows that nothing answers anymore. For years, the mansion sits like this, locked, unattended, slowly absorbing weather and time. Wind finds its way through broken panes. Rain traces the same paths again and again, until stone darkens and wood softens. The house begins to breathe differently. In winter, cold settles deep into walls designed to be warmed constantly. Stone holds that cold the way memory holds grief, slowly, stubbornly. In summer, heat builds in sealed rooms, warping what remains of floors and ceilings. Nature does not attack. It reclaims. Vines crawl. Moss spreads. Trees drop seeds into gutters that were never meant to host life. The line between architecture and landscape blurs. And then people come back, but not the way the house was built to receive them. Urban explorers. They arrive quietly, often at dawn or after sunset. Cameras in hand. Flashlights cutting narrow cones of light through darkness that has not been disturbed in years. They do not come to live here. They come to witness. Inside, they find a palace stripped of its skin. Grand halls still exist, but their voices are gone. Ceilings soar above empty floors. Staircases lead upward into shadow. The indoor pool, once a symbol of excess, lies ruined, cracked, filled with debris and stagnant water. Underground tunnels surprise many explorers. Hidden passageways once used by staff to move unseen now echo with footsteps again, briefly. Kitchens remain, frozen in abandonment, rusted equipment, shelves still lined in places. Objects left behind not because they were valuable, but because they were not. This is what makes abandoned places unsettling. Not what is missing, but what remains. For photographers and explorers, Lynnewood Hall becomes famous. Images circulate online. Articles appear. Business publications describe it as a decaying monument to the Gilded Age. But photographs cannot capture the full experience. They cannot reproduce the silence. They cannot convey how sound behaves inside a structure this large when nothing absorbs it anymore. A single footstep travels. A whisper returns to you altered. The building speaks back, not in words, but in acoustics. And with that attention comes a question that has no easy answer. What does society owe a place like this? To some, Lynnewood Hall is an embarrassment, a relic of excess, a monument to inequality. Why preserve the vanity project of a long-dead elite? To others, it is cultural infrastructure, a physical document of how America once imagined itself. To erase it would be to simplify history into something more comfortable, but less honest. Preservation debates form around the mansion. Restoration would cost hundreds of millions. Maintenance alone demands enormous resources. Adaptive reuse poses challenges. Modern codes, accessibility, practicality. A palace built to impress 19th century guests is ill-suited for a 21st century life. And yet, letting it collapse feels like surrender, because abandonment carries psychological weight. When a society allows its largest symbols to decay, it sends a message, not just about money, but about memory. Lynnewood Hall sits in this tension. Too big to ignore. Too costly to fix casually. Too historically significant to demolish without regret. This is where the idea of sudden abandonment misleads us. From the outside, the change feels abrupt. A building that once hosted 1,000 guests now hosts no one. A ballroom becomes a ruin. A swimming pool becomes rubble. But the truth is slower. The Widener family did not walk away in anger or disinterest. They were thinned out by tragedy, redirected by changing values, overwhelmed by scale. Institutions tried to adapt the house. They failed, not because of negligence, but because the math stopped working. And the modern world, with its efficiency and compression, has little patience for structures that demand constant devotion. Lynnewood Hall becomes a victim of maintenance. Not neglect, maintenance. Because every roof tile, every window, every pipe insists on attention. And attention costs money. And money demands justification. What does this building produce? Not profit, not housing density, not speed. It produces reflection. And reflection is expensive. This is why abandoned palaces feel different from abandoned factories or schools. They were never meant to be useful in the first place. They were meant to be symbolic. And symbols age poorly. Inside Lynnewood Hall, you can still trace intention, the alignment of rooms, the way corridors frame movement, the symmetry designed to make visitors feel small and owners feel eternal. But eternity has expiration dates. The urban explorers leave. The gates are locked again. Silence returns. The mansion waits, not passively, but expectantly, because history, unlike nature, sometimes circles back. When the Lynnewood Hall Preservation Foundation purchases a property in 2023, it is not an act of nostalgia. It is an act of resistance. Resistance against forgetting. The goal is not to recreate the Widener lifestyle. That world is gone. It cannot be resurrected honestly. The goal is stabilization, interpretation, preservation, to allow the building to stand not as a shrine to wealth, but as evidence, evidence of ambition, evidence of loss, evidence of how quickly certainty can dissolve. Abandonment, it turns out, is not the opposite of care. It is what happens when care becomes impossible. And Lynnewood Hall exists in that space between what was loved and what can no longer be sustained. There is a strange moment that happens when a place is finally noticed again, not rediscovered. Noticed. Lynnewood Hall does not suddenly change when new owners arrive. The stone does not heal. The cracks do not close. The past does not rearrange itself into something comfortable. But intention returns. And intention alters meaning. When the Lynnewood Hall Preservation Foundation purchases the mansion in 2023, it is not because the building makes sense in modern terms. It does not. The numbers alone are daunting. Restoration estimates stretch into the hundreds of millions. Every decision is constrained by history, regulation, and physics. You cannot simply renovate a palace. You negotiate with it, because every wall carries weight, not just structurally, but historically. Every alteration must answer to the past and justify itself to the future. This is the paradox of preservation. To save something, you must accept that it will never again be what it was. Lynnewood Hall will not return as a private home. No modern family needs or wants. 110 rooms, underground tunnels, and a ballroom for 1,000 guests. The house was built for a way of life that no longer exists. And that is precisely why it matters. Preservation is not about nostalgia. It is about context. To walk through a place like Lynnewood Hall is to confront the scale of ambition that once felt reasonable. The Gilded Age did not see itself as excessive. It saw itself as victorious. Industrial wealth was proof of progress. Monumental homes were not indulgences. They were evidence. But time reinterprets evidence. What once symbolized triumph now raises questions. How much space does one family need? How many people must labor invisibly to sustain visible luxury? What happens when private dreams outgrow public patience? These are not accusations. They are consequences. The Wideners were not villains. They were participants in a system that rewarded scale, spectacle, and accumulation. They were also philanthropists. Their donations reshaped American cultural life. The National Gallery of Art exists, in part, because of what left Lynnewood Hall. This is the irony that preservation forces us to confront. The same wealth that built exclusion also created access. A palace meant to glorify a single family ultimately enriched a nation. And yet, the house remains, empty, massive, unresolved. Restoration plans move slowly, deliberately. Stabilization comes first. Roofs, drainage, structural integrity. The goal is not beauty yet, but survival, because survival is expensive. Every year a building like this stands, it demands care. Even in stillness, it consumes resources. Preservation is not a one-time act. It is a commitment without a finish line. And that raises the question again. Why do this at all? Why preserve a structure born of excess in a world struggling with scarcity? The answer lies in discomfort. Places like Lynnewood Hall make us uneasy because they resist simplification. They refuse to be purely admirable or purely condemnable. They exist in a moral gray space that modern narratives prefer to avoid. But history is not tidy. This palace contains contradiction in stone. A butcher's son rises to unimaginable wealth. That wealth builds beauty and inequality. Tragedy erases heirs. Art leaves private walls to become public good. A house outlives the reason it was built. To demolish Lynnewood Hall would be to erase that complexity. To preserve it is to accept it. And acceptance does not mean celebration. It means memory. Standing inside the mansion today, you are struck not by grandeur, but by proportion. Everything is larger than the human body. Ceilings soar. Doorways frame emptiness. Even decay feels oversized. The building does not invite comfort. It invites perspective. This is why the phrase, suddenly abandoned, feels wrong. Nothing about the story is sudden. The Widener dynasty did not collapse overnight. It was reshaped by death, by shifting values, by a century that moved on without asking permission. The mansion did not fall into ruin instantly. It eroded slowly, through practical decisions made by people responding rationally to impossible costs. What feels sudden is our encounter with the result. We arrive late. We see the aftermath. We assume drama where there was mostly arithmetic. Lynnewood Hall was not abandoned because it was worthless. It was abandoned because it was too valuable, too large to maintain privately, too historically charged to adapt easily, too expensive to ignore, yet too impractical to inhabit, and perhaps most importantly, too full of ghosts that do not pay taxes. Every room carries expectation. Every corridor points backward. To live here would be to live inside a museum of someone else's ambition. Modern life does not tolerate that weight. And yet, as a public artifact, as a preserved structure, the weight becomes useful. It teaches scale. It teaches consequence. It teaches that progress leaves things behind, not because they failed, but because the world moved differently. Lynnewood Hall is not a warning against wealth. It is a warning against assuming permanence. Money can buy marble. It can buy art and land and silence. But it cannot buy a future that wants what you built. And so, the palace waits, not for a family, not for grandeur, but for interpretation, for footsteps that come to learn, not to own. Return with me to 920 Spring Avenue, Elkins Park, Pennsylvania. The winter light is low, cold. Bare trees scratch the sky. Wind drifts across the long driveway. The iron gate rattles softly, a hesitant echo of the lives that once passed through it. From a distance, Lynnewood Hall seems almost serene. Limestone walls glow faintly in the late afternoon, stubbornly proud. Its symmetry and scale appear untouched by tragedy or time. But as always, the closer you move, the more the truth is revealed. Windows stare like empty eyes. Stains mar the stone. Sections where glass once protected interiors now gape open to the elements. A shutter taps intermittently inside, slow and patient, like a heartbeat counting years instead of seconds. The air smells of wet leaves and plaster. Dust hangs in thin layers over the surfaces of forgotten thresholds. This is not merely an abandoned mansion. This is a monument to human ambition and mortality. To walk through Lynnewood Hall is to feel the presence of everything and everyone who ever shaped it, and then realize how quickly those forces vanished. You pass through the entrance. Immediately, temperature drops. Stone holds cold, not as physical sensation alone, but as memory. You can sense the weight of history pressing down, not threatening, but undeniable. Ceilings soar above you, emphasizing how small your body is in comparison. Spaces insist on reverence, even when the rooms themselves are empty. Every marble surface, every carved panel, every shadow tells a story of what was intended, what was lost, and what endures. Once these rooms cradled life, laughter, music, footsteps echoing over polished floors, orchestras, gala dinners for hundreds, silk brushing marble, candles reflecting in chandeliers, perfume mixing with cigar smoke, the air filled with expectation and human presence. And yet, a single disaster can redefine everything. April 15th, 1912. The Titanic, the Atlantic, George Widener and Harry Elkins Widener, fathers and sons, heirs to a fortune designed to sustain a dynasty and a palace, drowned. Life plans were instantly amputated. The mansion, built to hold generations, suddenly became a home for absence. Peter A.B. Widener died in 1915, a man who had accumulated everything and lost almost all that he loved. Joseph E. Widener inherited not a thriving house, but a structure hollowed by grief and circumstance. The family's art collection, once the soul of the house, moved to the National Gallery of Art in 1942. Lynnewood Hall's treasures became public inheritance, leaving the mansion as a shell of memory and labor. The house changed function over the decades. In 1952, it became a theological seminary. Ballrooms became classrooms. Kitchens became lecture spaces. The mansion adapted, but always imperfectly. Its size, its luxury, and its original purpose were too large, too heavy for practical adaptation. Slowly, parts of the interior were dismantled and sold. Architectural elements became cash. Every transaction chipped away at the integrity of the original vision. By the late 1990s, the seminary could no longer sustain it. Lynnewood Hall was abandoned, silent, empty. Its tunnels, hidden passageways, and forgotten rooms attracted urban explorers. Photographs show decaying floors, pools filled with debris, broken windows, and sunlight slicing through ruined halls. Explorers called it frozen in time, a palace trapped between human history and natural reclamation. And then, slowly, deliberately, the narrative began to reverse. In 2023, Lynnewood Hall was purchased for $9 million by the Lynnewood Hall Preservation Foundation. The goal: restore, stabilize, and reinterpret, not as a private residence, not as a Gilded Age museum, but as a preserved historical artifact. By 2025, it was listed on the National Register of Historic Places. This is a lesson of Lynnewood Hall. A palace may be abandoned by people, but history itself can intervene to preserve it. Time, paradoxically, becomes both destroyer and protector. Walk through the halls now. You feel the echoes of staff long gone, the invisible army that supported a visible extravagance. The kitchen, once bustling with preparation for hundreds of meals, now holds only shadows. The underground tunnels that carried servants unnoticed by guests are empty, but their geometry remains, a testament to invisible labor. Every detail, every stone, every corridor bears the imprint of ambition, wealth, tragedy, and human endurance. Outside, the gardens whisper what the mansion cannot. Originally, 300 acres of grounds with formal gardens spanning over 33 acres, fountains, hedges, and landscape vistas designed to impress, are now partially reclaimed by nature. Only 35 acres remain contiguous. Trees have grown where paths once curved. Grass overtakes fountains. Yet in decay, there's a haunting beauty, a reminder that even nature respects proportion. And yet, the mansion does not feel defeated. It does not beg for pity. It teaches. It teaches that wealth can build empires, but cannot buy the future. It teaches that grand ambition can be undone by events as uncontrollable as the sea. It teaches that tragedy, economics, and time are as structural to history as steel and marble. Standing at the entrance once more, you understand why this palace feels heavy with meaning. It was abandoned not because it lacked value. It was abandoned because its value, financial, historical, emotional, was too vast to sustain privately. It carried a weight no modern inhabitant could shoulder, and yet too precious to leave completely to ruin. The driveway stretches long and empty. Bare trees frame the limestone facade fading into dusk. Shadows deepen inside the broken windows. Inside, silence lingers. Not oppressive, but profound. You imagine the footsteps that will never return. The voices that will never echo again. The plans that were erased by waves in the Atlantic. And still, the mansion endures. Not as a home, not as a palace, not as a symbol of wealth, but as a lesson written in stone. In the end, the narrative completes a circle. A butcher's son rises to empire. A palace is built. The sea claims the heirs. Art leaves the walls. Institutions repurpose the space. Nature reclaims. Human attention flickers in and out. Restoration begins. Time, in its quiet persistence, has both abandoned and preserved the mansion. And as the winter wind slides through branches once more, rattling the ironwork at the gate, you realize the ultimate truth. Lynnewood Hall was never abandoned by wealth. It was abandoned by time, not as punishment, not as accident, simply as inevitability. And in that inevitability lies its lesson. The grandest houses, the largest ambitions, the most magnificent plans, all are shelters. Shelters from weather, shelters from mortality, never shelters from fate. The mansion waits. The wind moves through empty halls. Stone holds memory. And we, standing outside, understand, perhaps for the first time, what it truly means to inhabit history.